10, 9, 8. Go for main engine start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And 0 and liftoff of Space Shuttle Atlantis, reaching the crest of its historic achievements in space.
Houston, Atlantis is in roll. Roger, roll.
Houston is now controlling. The roll maneuver is complete. Atlantis is in a heads-down position on course for a 51.6 degree, 136 by 36 statute mile orbit. And the three main engines on Atlantis have now been throttled down to 72% of rated thrust, as the orbiter prepares to pass through the area of maximum dynamic pressure on the vehicle in the lower atmosphere.
Montana, Mintonk. Montague 8 is a landlocked state in the mountain west subregion of the western United States. It borders Idaho to the west, North Dakota to the east, South Dakota to the southeast, Wyoming to the south, and the Canadian provinces of Alberta, British Columbia, and Saskatchewan to the north. It is the fourth largest state by area, but the eighth least populous state and the third least densely populated state. Its capital is Helena, while the most populous city is Billings. The western half of the state contains numerous mountain ranges, while the eastern half is characterized by western prairie terrain and badlands, with smaller mountain ranges found throughout the state. Most of Montana first came under American sovereignty with the Louisiana Purchase from France in 1803 and was explored by the Lewis and Clark expedition shortly thereafter. 9. Fur trappers followed and were the main economic activity in the area until gold was discovered in 1852. The ensuing gold rush, along with the passage of the Homestead Acts in 1862, brought large numbers of American settlers to Montana. 9. Rapid population growth and development culminated in statehood on November 8, 1889. Mining, particularly around Butte and Helena, would remain the state's main economic engine through the mid-20th century. Montana has no official nickname, but several unofficial ones, most notably Big Sky Country, the Treasure State, Land of the Shining Mountains, and the Last Best Place. 10. Its economy is primarily based on agriculture, including ranching and cereal grain farming. Other significant economic resources include oil, gas, coal, mining, and lumber. The healthcare, service, defense, and government sectors are also significant to the state's economy. Montana's fastest growing sector is tourism, with 12.6 million tourists as of 2019 visiting the state each year. 11. Etymology of the name Montana comes from the Spanish word montaca, which in turn comes from the Latin word montania, meaning mountain, or more broadly mountainous country. 1213, Montaca del Norte Northern Mountain was the name given by early Spanish explorers to the entire mountainous region of the West. 13, the name Montana was added in 1863 to a bill by the United States House Committee on Territories, chaired at the time by James Ashley of Ohio, for the territory that would become Idaho Territory. 14, the name was changed by Representatives Henry Wilson, Massachusetts, and Benjamin F. Harding, Oregon, who complained that Montana had no meaning. 14 alternative names included Jefferson. 15. When Ashley presented a bill to establish a temporary government in 1864 for a new territory to be carved out of Idaho, he again chose Montana Territory. 16. This time, Representative Samuel Cox, also of Ohio, objected to the name. 16. Cox complained that the name was a misnomer given that most of the territory was not mountainous, and thought a Native American name would be more appropriate than a Spanish one. 16. Other names, such as Shoshone, were suggested, but the Committee on Territories decided that they had discretion to choose the name, so the original name of Montana was adopted. 16. History Maine article, History of Montagnarly Indian Treaty Territories in Montana's Assiniboine Family, Montana, 1890 to 91 for thousands of years. Various indigenous peoples have inhabited the land that is now Montana. Historic tribes encountered by Europeans and settlers from the United States included the Crow in the south central area, the Cheyenne and Lakota in the southeast, the Blackfeet, Assiniboine, and Gros Ventres in the central and north central area, and the Kootenai and Salish de Selil or Flathead in the west. The QL Ispi or Pendoriles and Kalispel tribes lived near Flathead Lake and the Western Mountains, respectively. A part of southeastern Montana was used as a corridor between the Crows and the related Hidatsis in North Dakota. 17. As part of the Missouri River watershed, all of the land in Montana east of the Continental Divide was part of the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, except for a tiny portion in the northeast that is part of the Hudson Bay drainage. Subsequent to and particularly in the decades following the Lewis and Clark expedition, European, Canadian, and American traders operated a fur trade, trading with indigenous peoples in both western and eastern portions of the area. Though the increased interaction between fur traders and indigenous peoples frequently proved to be a profitable partnership, conflicts broke out when indigenous interests were threatened, such as the conflict between American trappers and the Blackfeet. Indigenous peoples in the region were also decimated by diseases introduced by fur traders to which they had no immunity. 1819. The trading post Fort Raymond 1807 to 1811 was constructed in Crow Indian country in 1807. 20 until the Oregon Treaty of 1846. Land west of the Continental Divide was disputed between the British and U.S. governments and was known as the Oregon Country. The first permanent settlement by Euro-Americans in what today is Montana was St. Mary's, established in 1841 near present-day Stevensville. 21. In 1847, Fort Benton was built as the uppermost fur trading post on the Missouri River. 22. In the 1850s, settlers began moving into the Beaverhead and Big Hole valleys from the Oregon Trail and into the Clark's Fork Valley. 23. The first gold discovered in Montana was at Gold Creek near present-day Garrison in 1852. The gold rush in the region commenced in earnest starting in 1862. A series of major mineral discoveries in the western part of the state found gold, silver, copper, lead, and coal, and later oil, which attracted tens of thousands of miners to the area. The richest of all gold placer diggings was discovered at Alder Gulch, where the town of Virginia City was established. Other rich placer deposits were found at Last Chance Gulch, where the city of Helena now stands, Confederate Gulch, Silver Bow, Emigrant Gulch, and Cook City. Gold output between 1862 and 1876 reached $144 million, after which silver became even more important. The largest mining operations were at Butte, with important silver deposits and expansive copper deposits. Montana Territory Maine articles, Organic Act section list of organic acts, and Montana Territory Montana Territory in 1865-24. Before the creation of Montana Territory 1864 to 1889, areas within present-day Montana were part of the Oregon Territory 1848 to 1859, Washington Territory 1853 to 1863, Idaho Territory 1863 to 1864, and Dakota Territory 1861 to 1864. Montana Territory became a territory of the United States on May 26, 1864. The first territorial capital was located at Bannock. Sidney Edgerton served as the first territorial governor. The capital moved to Virginia City in 1865 and to Helena in 1875. In 1870, the non-Indian population of the Montana Territory was 20,595. 25. The Montana Historical Society, founded on February 2, 1865, in Virginia City, is the oldest such institution west of the Mississippi excluding Louisiana. 26. In 1869 and 1870 respectively, The Cook-Folsom-Peterson and the Washburn-Langford-Doane expeditions were launched from Helena into the upper Yellowstone region. The extraordinary discoveries and reports from these expeditions led to the creation of Yellowstone National Park in 1872. Conflixie also list of military installations in Montana. Settlers began populating Montana from the 1850s through the 1870s. Disputes with Native Americans ensued, primarily over land ownership and control. In 1855, Washington Territorial Governor Isaac Stevens negotiated the Hellgate Treaty between the United States government and the Salish, Pendorile, and Kootenai people of western Montana, which established boundaries for the tribal nations. The treaty was ratified in 1859. 27. While the treaty established what later became the Flathead Indian Reservation, trouble with interpreters and confusion over the terms of the treaty led settlers to believe the Bitterroot Valley was up. End to settlement, but the tribal nations disputed those provisions. 28. The Salish remained in the Bitterroot Valley until 1891. 29. The first U.S. Army post established in Montana was Camp Cook in 1866 on the Missouri River to protect steamboat traffic to Fort Benton. More than a dozen additional military outposts were established in the state. Pressure over land ownership and control increased due to discoveries of gold in various parts of Montana and surrounding states. Major battles occurred in Montana during Red Cloud's War, the Great Sioux War of 1876, and the Nez Perce War, and in conflicts with Piegan Blackfeet. The most notable were the Marias Massacre, 1870, Battle of the Little Bighorn, 1876, Battle of the Big Hole, 1877, and Battle of Bear Paw, 1877. The last recorded conflict in Montana between the U.S. Army and Native Americans occurred in 1887 during the Battle of Crow Agency in the Bighorn country. Native survivors who had signed treaties were generally required to move onto reservations. 30 Chief Joseph and Call John Gibbon met again on the Big Hole battlefield site in 1889. Simultaneously with these conflicts, bison, a keystone species and the primary protein source that Native people had survived on for many centuries, were being destroyed. Experts estimate that around 13 million bison roamed Montana in 1870. 31. In 1875, General Philip Sheridan pleaded to a joint session of Congress to authorize the slaughtering of bison herds to deprive Native people of their source of food. 32. By 1884, commercial hunting had brought bison to the verge of extinction. Only about 325 bison remained in the entire United States. 33. Cattle ranching. Cattle ranching has been central to Montana's history and economy since Johnny Grant began, wintering cattle in the Deer Lodge Valley in the 1850s and traded cattle fattened and fertile Montana valleys with immigrants on the Oregon Trail. 34. Nelson Story brought the first Texas Longhorn cattle into the territory in 1866. 3536 Granville Stewart, Samuel Hauser, and Andrew J. Davis started a major open-range cattle operation in Fergus County in 1879. 3738. The Grant Corps' Ranch National Historic Site in Deer Lodge is maintained today as a link to the ranching style of the late 19th century. Operated by the National Park Service, it is a 1,900-acre, 7.7 square kilometers working ranch. 39 Railroad's Buffalo Soldiers, FT, Keogh, Montana, 1890. The nickname was given to the Black Cavalry by the Native American tribes they fought. Tracks of the Northern Pacific Railroad, NPR, reached Montana from the west in 1882 and from the east in 1883. However, the railroad played a major role in sparking tensions with Native American tribes in the 1870s. Jay Cook, the NPR president, launched major surveys into the Yellowstone Valley in 1871, 1872, and 1873, which were challenged forcefully by the Sioux under-chief Sitting Bull. These clashes, in part, contributed to the Panic of 1873, a financial crisis that delayed the construction of the railroad into Montana. 40. Surveys in 1874, 1875, and 1876 helped spark the Great Sioux War of 1876. The Transcontinental NPR was completed on September 8, 1883, at Gold Creek. In 1881, the Utah and Northern Railway, a branch line of the Union Pacific, completed a narrow-gauge line from northern Utah to Butte. 41. A number of smaller spur lines operated in Montana from 1881 into the 20th century, including the Oregon Short Line, Montana Railroad, and Milwaukee Road. Tracks of the Great Northern Railroad GNR reached eastern Montana in 1887, and when they reached the northern Rocky Mountains in 1890. The GNR became a significant promoter of tourism to Glacier National Park region. The Transcontinental GNR was completed on January 6, 1893 at scenic Washington 42 and is known as the High Line, being the northernmost transcontinental rail line in the United States. Under territorial Governor Thomas Marr, Montanans held a constitutional convention in 1866 in a failed bid for statehood. A second constitutional convention held in Helena in 1880 produced a constitution ratified 3-1 by Montana citizens in November 1884. For political reasons, Congress did not approve Montana statehood until February 1889, and President Grover Cleveland signed an omnibus bill granting statehood to Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Washington once the appropriate state constitutions were crafted. In July 1889, Montanans convened their third constitutional convention and produced a constitution accepted by the people and the federal government. On November 8, 1889, President Benjamin Harrison proclaimed Montana the Union's 41st state. The first state governor was Joseph K. Toole, 45. In the 1880s, Helena, the state capital, had more millionaires per capita than any other United States city. 46. Homesteading. The Homestead Act of 1862 provided free land to settlers who could claim and prove up 160 acres, 0.65 square kilometers of federal land in the Midwest and Western United States. Montana did not see a large influx of immigrants from this act because 160 acres were usually insufficient to support a family in the arid territory. 47. The first homestead claim under the act in Montana was made by David Carpenter near Helena in 1868. The first claim by a woman was made near Warm Springs Creek by Gwenllian Evans, the daughter of Deer Lodge, Montana pioneer Morgan Evans. 48. By 1880, farms were in the more verdant valleys of central and western Montana, but few were on the eastern plains. 49. The Desert Land Act of 1877 was passed to allow settlement of arid lands in the west and allotted 640 acres to 0.6 square kilometers to settlers for a fee of 25 cents per. After 3 years, a fee of $1 per acre would be paid and the settler would own the land. This act brought mostly cattle and sheep ranchers into Montana, many of whom grazed their herds on the Montana prairie for 3 years, did little to irrigate the land, and then abandoned it without paying the final fees. 48. Some farmers came with the arrival of the Great Northern and Northern Pacific Railroads throughout the 1880s and 1890s, though in relatively small numbers. 50 Mennonite family in Montana, c. 1937. In the early 1900s, James J. Hill of the Great Northern began to promote settlement in the Montana prairie to fill his trains with settlers and goods. Other railroads followed suit. 51. In 1902, the Reclamation Act was passed, allowing irrigation projects to be built in Montana's eastern river valleys. In 1909, Congress passed the Enlarged Homestead Act that expanded the amount of free land from 160 to 320 acres, 0.6 to 1.3 square kilometers per family, and in 1912 reduced the time to prove up on a claim to 30. In 1916, the Stock Raising Homestead Act allowed homesteads of 640 acres in areas unsuitable for irrigation. 53. This combination of advertising and changes in the Homestead Act drew tens of thousands of homesteaders lured by free land, with World War I bringing particularly high wheat prices. In addition, Montana was going through a temporary period of higher than average precipitation. 50. For homesteaders arriving in this period were known as Honeyakers or Scissorbills. 50. The word Honyaker possibly derived from the ethnic slur Hunyak 55 and was applied in a derisive manner at homesteaders who were perceived as being greenhorns, new at his business, or unprepared. 56. However, most of these new settlers had farming experience, though many did not. 57. Honyaker, he was the Jote of a half-century ago, swarming into a hostile land, duped when he started, robbed when he arrived. Hopeful, courageous, ambitious, he sought independence or adventure, comfort and security. The Honyaker was farmer, spinster, deep-sea diver, fiddler, physician, bartender, cook. He lived in Minnesota or Wisconsin, Massachusetts or Maine. There the news sought him out. Jim Hill's News of Free Land in the Treasure State, Joseph Kinsey Howard, Montana, high, wide, and handsome 1960. For 48, however, farmers faced a number of problems. Massive debt was one. 58. Also, most settlers were from wetter regions, unprepared for the dry climate, lack of trees, and scarce water resources. 59. In addition, small homesteads of fewer than 320 acres, 130 hectares, were unsuited to the environment. Weather and agricultural conditions are much harsher and drier west of the 100th meridian. 60. Then, the droughts of 1917 to 1921 proved devastating. Many people left, and half the banks in the state went bankrupt as a result of providing mortgages that could not be repaid. 61. As a result, farm sizes increased while the number of farms decreased. 60. By 1910, homesteaders filed claims on over 5 million acres, and by 1923, over 93 million acres were farmed. 62. In 1910, the Great Falls Land Office alone had more than 1,000 homestead filings per month. 63. And at the peak of 1917 to 1918, it had 14,000 new homesteads each year. 58. Significant drops occurred following the drought in 1919. 60. Montana and World War IA letters. World War I broke out. Jeanette Rankin, representative of Montana and the first woman in the United States to be a member of Congress, voted against the United States Declaration of War. Her actions were widely criticized in Montana, where support for the war and patriotism was strong. 64. In 1917 to 1918, due to a miscalculation of Montana's population, about 40,000 Montanans, 10% of the state's population, 64 volunteered or were drafted into the armed forces. This represented a manpower contribution to the war that was 25% higher than any other state on a per capita basis. Around 1,500 Montanans died as a result of the war, and 2,437 were wounded, also higher than any other state on a per capita basis. 65 Montana's Remount Station in Miles City provided 10,000 cavalry horses for the war, more than any other Army post in the country. The war created a boom for Montana mining, lumber, and farming interests as demand for war materials and food increased. 64. In June 1917, the U.S. Congress passed the Espionage Act of 1917, which was extended by the Sedition Act of 1918. 66. In February 1918, the Montana legislature had passed the Montana Sedition Act, which was a model for the federal version. 67. In combination, these laws criminalized criticism of the U.S. government, military, or symbols through speech or other means. The Montana Act led to the arrest of more than 200 individuals and the conviction of 78, mostly of German or Austrian descent. More than 40 spent time in prison. In May 2006, Then Governor Brian Schweitzer posthumously issued full pardons for all those convicted of violating the Montana Sedition Act. 68 the Montanans who opposed U.S. entry into the war included immigrant groups of German and Irish heritage, as well as pacifist Anabaptist people such as the Hutterites and Mennonites, many of whom were also of Germanic heritage. In turn, pro-war groups formed, such as the Montana Council of Defense, created by Governor Samuel V. Stewart, and local loyalty committees. 60 for war sentiment was complicated by labor issues. The Anaconda Copper Company, which was at its historic peak of copper production, 69 was an extremely powerful force in Montana, but it also faced criticism and opposition from socialist newspapers and unions struggling to make gains for their members. 70. In Butte, a multi-ethnic community with a significant European immigrant population, labor unions, particularly the newly formed Metal Mine Workers Union, opposed the war on grounds it mostly profited large lumber and mining interests. 64. In the wake of ramped-up mine production and the speculator mine disaster in June 1917, 60 for industrial workers of the World Organizer Frank Little arrived in Butte to organize miners. He gave some speeches with inflammatory anti-war rhetoric. On August 1, 1917, he was dragged from his boarding house by masked vigilantes and hanged from a railroad trestle, considered a lynching. 71 Little's murder and the strikes that followed resulted in the National Guard being sent to Butte to restore order. 60 for overall. Anti-German and anti-labor sentiment increased and created a movement that led to the passage of the Montana Sedition Act the following February. 72. In addition, the Council of Defense was made a state agency with the power to prosecute and punish individuals deemed in violation of the act. The council also passed rules limiting public gatherings and prohibiting the speaking of German in public. 64. In the wake of the legislative action in 1918, emotions rose. U.S. Attorney Burton K. Wheeler and several district court judges who hesitated to prosecute or convict people brought up on charges were strongly criticized. Wheeler was brought before the Council of Defense, though he avoided formal proceedings, and a district court judge from Forsyth was impeached. Burnings of German-language books and several near hangings occurred. The prohibition on speaking German remained in effect into the early 1920s. Complicating the wartime struggles, the 1918 influenza epidemic claimed the lives of more than 5,000 Montanans. 64. The suppression of civil liberties that occurred led some historians to dub this period Montana's agony. 70. Depression era and economic depression began in Montana after World War I and lasted through the Great Depression until the beginning of World War II. This caused great hardship for farmers, ranchers, and miners. 73, 74 Montana, and World War I won the time the U.S. entered World War II on December 8, 1941. Many Montanans had enlisted in the military to escape the poor national economy of the previous decade. Another 40,000 plus Montanans entered the armed forces in the first year following the declaration of war, and more than 57,000 joined up before the war ended. These numbers constituted about 10% of the state's population, and Montana again contributed one of the highest numbers of soldiers per capita of any state. Many Native Americans were among those who served, including soldiers from the Crow Nation who became code talkers. At least 1,500 Montanans died in the war. 75 Montana also was the training ground for the 1st Special Service Force, or Devil's Brigade, a joint U.S.-Canadian commando-style force that trained at Fort William Henry Harrison for experience in mountainous and winter conditions before deployment. 75-76 air bases were built in Great Falls, Lewistown, Cut Bank, and Glasgow, some of which were used as staging areas to prepare planes to be sent to Allied forces during the war. About 30 Japanese Fugo balloon bombs were documented to have landed in Montana, though no casualties nor major forest fires were attributed to them. 75 in 1940, Jeanette Rankin was again elected to Congress. In 1941, as she had in 1917, she voted against the United States declaration of war after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. Hers was the only vote against a war, and in the wake of public outcry over her vote, Rankin required police protection for a time. Other pacifists tended to be those from peace churches who generally opposed war. Many individuals claiming conscientious objector status from throughout the U.S. were sent to Montana during the war as smoke jumpers and for other forest firefighting duties. 75 in 1942, the U.S. Army established Camp Rimini near Helena for the purpose of training sled dogs in winter weather. Other military during World War II, the planned battleship USS Montana was named in honor of the state, but it was never completed. Montana is the only one of the first 48 states lacking a completed battleship being named for it. Alaska and Hawaii have both had nuclear submarines named after them. Montana is the only state in the Union without a modern naval ship named in its honor. However, in August 2007, Senator John Tester asked that a submarine be christened USS Montana. 77. Secretary of the Navy Ray Mabus announced on September 3, 2015, that Virginia-class attack submarine SSN 79 will become the second commissioned warship to bear the name. 78. Cold War Montana. In the post-World War to Cold War era, Montana became host to U.S. Air Force Military Air Transport Service 1947 for airlift training in C-50 for Skymasters, and eventually, in 1953, Strategic Air Command Air and Missile Forces were based at Malmstrom Air Force Base in Great Falls. The base also hosted the 29th Fighter Interceptor Squadron Air Defense Command from 1953 to 1968. In December 1959, Malmstrom AFB was selected as the home of the new Minuteman I intercontinental ballistic missile. The first operational missiles were in place and ready in early 1962. In late 1962, missiles assigned to the 341st Strategic Missile Wing played a major role in the Cuban Missile Crisis. When the Soviets removed their missiles from Cuba, President John F. Kennedy said the Soviets backed down because they knew he had an ace in the hole, referring directly to the Minuteman missiles in Montana. Montana eventually became home to the largest ICBM field in the U.S., covering 23,500 square miles, 61,000 square kilometers. 79. Geography main article, Geography of Montana. See also, Regional designations of Montana, Ecological systems of Montana, List of mountain ranges in Montana, and List of forests in Montana. Map of Montana. Montana is one of the 8 mountain states, located in the north of the region known as the Western United States. It borders North Dakota and South Dakota to the east. Wyoming is to the south, Idaho is to the west and southwest, and the Canadian provinces of British Columbia, Alberta, and Saskatchewan are to the north, making it the only state to border 3 Canadian provinces. With an area of 147,040 square miles, 380,800 square kilometers, one Montana is slightly larger than Japan or Germany. It is the 4th largest state in the United States after Alaska, Texas, and California, 80, and the largest landlocked state, 81. Topography. Our life map of Montana state's topography is roughly defined by the Continental Divide, which splits much of the state into distinct eastern and western regions. 82. Most of Montana's 100 or more named mountain ranges are in the state's western half, most of which is geologically and geographically part of the northern Rocky Mountains. 82. 83. The Absaroka and Birdtooth ranges in the state's south-central part are technically part of the Central Rocky Mountains. 84. The Rocky Mountain Front is a significant feature in the state's north-central portion. 85. And isolated island ranges that interrupt the prairie landscape common in the central and eastern parts of the state. 86. About 60% of the state is prairie, part of the northern Great Plains. 87, the Bitterroot Mountains, one of the longest continuous ranges in the Rocky Mountain chain from Alaska to Mexico. 88, along with smaller ranges, including the Coeur d'Alene Mountains and the Cabinet Mountains, divide the state from Idaho. The southern third of the Bitterroot Range blends into the Continental Divide. 89 other major mountain ranges west of the divide include the Cabinet Mountains, the Anaconda Range, the Missions, the Garnet Range, the Sapphire Mountains, and the Flint Creek Range. 90. The divide's northern section, where the mountains rapidly give way to prairie, is part of the Rocky Mountain Front. 91. The front is most pronounced in the Lewis Range, located primarily in Glacier National Park. 92. Due to the configuration of mountain ranges in Glacier National Park, the Northern Divide, which begins in Alaska's Seward Peninsula, 93, crosses this region and turns east in Montana at Triple Divide. Peak, 94. It causes the Waterton River, Belly, and St. Mary rivers to flow north into Alberta, Canada. 95. There they join the Saskatchewan River, which ultimately empties into Hudson Bay. 96, east of the divide. Several roughly parallel ranges cover the state's southern part, including the Gravelly Range, Madison Range, Gallatin Range, Absaroka Range, and Birdtooth Mountains. 97. The Birdtooth Plateau is the largest continuous landmass over 10,000 feet 3,000 meters high in the continental United States. 98. It contains the state's highest point, Granite Peak, 12,799 feet 3,901 meters high. 98 north of these ranges are the Big Belt Mountains, Bridger Mountains, Tobacco Roots, and several island ranges, including the Crazy Mountains and Little Belt Mountains. 99, St. Mary Lake and Glacier National Park. Between many mountain ranges are several rich river valleys. The Big Hole, 100 Bitterroot, 101 Gallatin, 100 to Flathead, 103 100 for, and Paradise Valley's 105 have extensive agricultural resources and multiple opportunities for tourism and recreation. East and north of this transition zone are the expansive and sparsely populated northern plains with tableland prairies, smaller island mountain ranges, and badlands. 106. The isolated island ranges east of the divide include the Bear Paw Mountains, 107, Bull Mountains, 108, Castle Mountains, 109, Crazy Mountains, 110, Highwood Mountains, 111, Judith Mountains, 111, Little Belt Mountains, 109, Little Rocky Mountains, 111, the Pryor Mountains, 110, Little Snowy Mountains, Big Snowy Mountains, 108, Sweetgrass Hills, 108, and in the state's southeastern corner, near Ekalaka the Long Pines, 83. Many of these isolated eastern ranges were created about 120 to 66 million years ago when magma welling up from the interior cracked and bowed the Earth's surface here. One to the area east of the divide in the state's north-central portion is known for the Missoula breaks and other significant rock formations. 113. 3 butts south of Great Falls are major landmarks: Cascade, Crown, Square, Shaw, and Butts. 114, known as laccoliths. They formed when igneous rock protruded through cracks in the sedimentary rock. 114. The underlying surface consists of sandstone and shale. 115. Surface soils in the area are highly diverse and greatly affected by the local geology, whether glaciated plain, intermountain basin, mountain foothills, or tableland. 116. Foothill regions are often covered in weathered stone or broken slate, or consist of uncovered bare rock, usually igneous, quartzite, sandstone, or shale. 117. The soil of intermountain basins usually consists of clay, gravel, sand, silt, and volcanic ash, much of it laid down by lakes which covered the region during the Oligocene 33 to 23 million years ago. 118 tablelands are often topped with argillite gravel and weathered quartzite, occasionally underlain by shale. 119. The glaciated plains are generally covered in clay, gravel, sand, and silt left by the proglacial lake Great Falls or by moraines or gravel-covered former lake basins left by the Wisconsin glaciation age, 5,000 to 11,000 years ago. Farther east, areas such as Makoshika State Park near Glendive and Medicine Rock State Park near Ekalaka contain some of the most scenic Badlands regions in the state. 121. The Hell Creek Formation in northeast Montana is a major source of dinosaur fossils. 122. Paleontologist Jack Horner of the Museum of the Rockies in Bozeman brought this formation to the world's attention with several major finds. 123. Rivers, lakes, and reservoirs. See also List of rivers of Montana and list of lakes in Montana. Montana has thousands of named rivers and creeks. 124, 450 miles, 720 kilometers, of which are known for blue ribbon trout fishing. 125, 126, Montana's water resources provide for recreation, hydropower, crop and forage irrigation, mining, and water. Montana is one of few geographic areas in the world whose rivers form parts of three major watersheds, i.e. where two continental divides intersect. Its rivers feed the Pacific Ocean, the Gulf of Mexico, and Hudson Bay. The watersheds divide at Triple Divide Peak in Glacier National Park. 127, if Hudson Bay is considered part of the Arctic Ocean. Triple Divide Peak is the only place on Earth with drainage to three different oceans. Pacific Ocean drainage. Basin Missouri Breaks region in central Montanal waters in Montana, west of the divide, flow into the Columbia River. The Clark Fork of the Columbia, not to be confused with the Clark's Fork of the Yellowstone River, rises near Butte, 128, and flows northwest to Missoula, where it is joined by the Blackfoot River and Bitterroot River. 129. Farther downstream, it is joined by the Flathead River before entering Idaho near Lake Pend Oreille. 95. 130. The Pend Oreille River forms the outflow of Lake Pend Oreille. The Pend Oreille River joined the Columbia River, which flows to the Pacific Ocean, making the 579-mile, 932 kilometers long Clark Fork, Pend Oreille, considered a single river system, the longest river in the Rocky Mountains. 131. The Clark Fork discharges the greatest volume of water of any river exiting the state. 132. The Kootenai River in northwest Montana is another major tributary of the Columbia. 133. Gulf of Mexico drainage basin east of the divide, the Missouri River, which is formed by the confluence of the Jefferson, Madison, and Gallatin rivers near Three Forks. 130. Flows due north through the west central part of the state to Great Falls. 135. From this point, it then flows generally east through fairly flat agricultural land and the Missouri Breaks to Fort Peck Reservoir. 136. The stretch of river between Fort Benton and the Fred Robinson Bridge at the western boundary of Fort Peck Reservoir was designated a National Wild and Scenic River in 1976. 136. The Missouri enters North Dakota near Fort Union. 137. Having drained more than half the land area of Montana, 82,000 square miles to 110,000 square kilometers. 135. Nearly one-third of the Missouri River in Montana lies behind 10 dams: Toston, Canyon Ferry, Hauser, Holter, Black Eagle, Rainbow, Cochrane, Ryan, Fort Peck. 138. Other major Montana tributaries of the Missouri include the Smith, 139, Milk, 140, Marias, 141, Judith, 142, and Musselshell rivers. Montana also claims the disputed title of possessing the world's shortest river, the Roe River, just outside Great Falls. 144. Through the Missouri, these rivers ultimately join the Mississippi River and flow into the Gulf of Mexico. 145. Hell Roaring Creek begins in southern Montana, and when combined with the Red Rock, Beaverhead, Jefferson, Missouri, and Mississippi River, is the longest river in North America and the fourth longest river in the world. The Yellowstone River rises on the Continental Divide near Younts Peak in Wyoming's Teton Wilderness. 146. It flows north through Yellowstone National Park, enters Montana near Gardner, and passes through the Paradise Valley to Livingston. 147. It then flows northeasterly 147 across the state through Billings, Miles City, Glendive, and Sidney. 148. The Yellowstone joins the Missoula in North Dakota just east of Fort Union. 149. It is the longest undammed, free-flowing river in the contiguous United States, 151, and drains about a quarter of Montana, 36,000 square miles, 93,000 square kilometers. 135 major tributaries of the Yellowstone include the Boulder, 152 Stillwater, 153 Clark's Fork, 154 Bighorn, 155 Tongue, 156 and Powder Rivers. 157 Hudson Bay drainage basin northern divide turns east in Montana at Triple Divide Peak, causing the Waterton, Belly, and St. Mary rivers to there they join the Saskatchewan River, which ultimately empties into Hudson Bay. 96 lakes and reservoirs. Montana has some 3,000 named lakes and reservoirs, including Flathead Lake, the largest natural freshwater lake in the western United States. Other major lakes include Whitefish Lake in the Flathead Valley and Lake McDonald and St. Mary Lake in Glacier National Park. The largest reservoir in the state is Fort Peck Reservoir on the Missouri River, which is contained by the second largest earthen dam and largest hydraulically filled dam in the world. 158. Other major reservoirs include Hungry Horse on the Flathead River, Lake Koocanusa on the Kootenai River, Lake Owell on the Marias River, Clark Canyon on the Beaverhead River, Yellowtail on the Bighorn River, Canyon Ferry, Hauser, Holter, Rainbow, and Black Eagle on the Missouri River. Flora and fauna. See also list of monocotyledons of Montana, list of coniferous plants of Montana, list of lichens of Montana, list of amphibians and reptiles of Montana, list of birds of Montana, fish of Montana, and mammals of Montana. 100-pound native Montana wolf, taken in 1928. Vegetation of the state includes lodgepole pine, ponderosa pine, Douglas fir, larch, spruce, aspen, birch, red cedar, hemlock, ash, alder, Rocky Mountain maple, and cottonwood trees. Forests cover about 25% of the state. Flowers native to Montana include asters, bitterroots, daisies, lupins, poppies, primroses, columbine, lilies, orchids, and dryads. Several species of sagebrush and cactus and many species of grasses are common. Many species of mushrooms and lichens, 159, are also found in the state. Montana is home to diverse fauna, including 14 amphibian, 169 fish, 161, 117 mammal, 162, 20 reptile, 163, and 427 bird, 160 for species. Additionally, more than 10,000 invertebrate species are present, including 180 mollusks and 30 crustaceans. Montana has the largest grizzly bear population in the lower 48 states. 165. Montana hosts 5 federally endangered species: black-footed ferret, whooping crane, least tern, pallid sturgeon, and white sturgeon, and 7 threatened species including the grizzly bear, Canadian lynx, and bull trout. 166A. Since reintroduction, the gray wolf population has stabilized at about 900 animals, and they have been delisted as endangered. 167. The Montana Department of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks manages fishing and hunting seasons for at least 17 species of game fish, including 7 species of trout, walleye, and smallmouth bass. 168, and at least 29 species of game birds and animals, including ringneck, pheasant, gray partridge, elk, pronghorn antelope, mule deer, white-tailed deer, gray wolf, and bighorn sheep. 169. Protected land. See also list of Montana State Parks. Pompey's Pillar National Monument. Monta contains Glacier National Park, the crown of the continent, and parts of Yellowstone National Park, including 3 of the park's 5 entrances. Other federally recognized sites include the Little Bighorn National Monument, Bighorn Canyon National Recreation Area, and Big Hole National Battlefield. The CSKT Bison Range is managed by the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes, and the American Prairie is owned and operated by a nonprofit organization. Federal and state agencies administer approximately 31,300,000 acres, 127,000 square kilometers, or 35% of Montana's land. The U.S. Department of Agriculture Forest Service administers 16,800,000 acres, 68,000 square kilometers of forest land in 10 national forests. There are approximately 3,300,000 acres, 13,000 square kilometers of wilderness in 12 separate wilderness areas that are part of the National Wilderness Preservation System, established by the Wilderness Act of 1964. The U.S. Department of the Interior Bureau of Land Management controls 8,100,000 acres, 33,000 square kilometers of federal land. The U.S. Department of the Interior Fish and Wildlife Service administers 110,000 acres, 450 square kilometers of 1.1 million acres of national wildlife refuges and waterfowl production. The U.S. Department of the Interior Bureau of Reclamation administers approximately 300,000 acres, 1,200 square kilometers of land and water surface in the state. The Montana Department of Fish, Wildlife and Parks operate approximately 275,265 acres, 1,113.96 square kilometers of state parks and access points on the state's rivers and lakes. The Montana Department of Natural Resources and Conservation manages 200,000 acres, 21,000 square kilometers of school trust land ceded by the federal government under the Land Ordinance of 1785 to the state in 188.9 when Montana was granted statehood. These lands are managed by the state for the benefit of public schools and institutions in the state. 170. Montana is a large state with considerable variation in geography, topography, and elevation, and the climate is equally varied. The state spans from below the 45th parallel, the line equidistant between the equator and North Pole, to the 49th parallel, and elevations range from under 2,000 feet, 610 meters, to nearly 13,000 feet, 0 meters above sea level. The western half is mountainous, interrupted by numerous large valleys. Eastern Montana comprises plains and badlands, broken by hills and isolated montane ranges, and has a semi-arid continental climate and climate classification (BSK). The Continental Divide has a considerable effect on the climate, as it restricts the flow of warmer air from the Pacific from moving east, and drier continental air from moving west. The area west of the Divide has a modified northern Pacific coast climate, with milder winters, cooler summers, less wind, and a longer growing season. 172 low clouds and fog often form in the valleys west of the Divide in winter, but this is rarely seen in the east. 173 average daytime temperatures vary from 28 F or 2 point to C in January to 80 for 0.5 F or 29 point to C in July. 170 for verification needed. The variation in geography leads to great variation in temperature. The highest observed summer temperature was 117 F or 47 point to C at Glendive on July 20, 1893, and Medicine Lake on July 5, 1937. Throughout the state, summer nights are generally cool and pleasant. Extreme hot weather is less common above 4,000 feet or 1,200 meters. 172 snowfall has been recorded in all months of the year in the more mountainous areas of central and western Montana, though it is rare in July and August. 170 to the coldest temperature on record for Montana is also the coldest temperature for the contiguous United States. On January 20, 1954, 70 degrees Fahrenheit or 56.7 C was recorded at a gold mining camp near Rogers Pass. Temperatures vary greatly on cold nights, and Helena, 40 miles 60 for kilometers to the southeast, had a low of only 36, for 37.8 C on the same date, and an all-time record low of 42 degrees Fahrenheit or 41.1 C. 172 winter cold spells are usually the result of cold continental air coming south from Canada. The front is often well defined, causing a large temperature drop in a 24-hour period. Conversely, airflow from the southwest results in Chinooks. These steady 25 to 50 miles per hour, 40 to 80 kilometers per hour or more winds can suddenly warm parts of Montana, especially areas just to the east of the mountains, where temperatures sometimes rise up to 50 to 60 F, 10.0 to 15.6 C for 10 days or longer. 172, 175. Loma is the site of the most extreme recorded temperature change in a 24-hour period in the United States. On January 15, 1972, a Chinook wind blew in and the temperature rose from 54 to 49 F, 47.8 to 9.4 C, a 103 degrees Fahrenheit, 49.4 C degree difference. 176, Clark Fork River, Missoula. In autumn, average annual precipitation is 15 inches 380 millimeters, but great variations are seen. The mountain ranges block the moist Pacific air, holding moisture in the western valleys and creating rain shadows to the east. Heron, in the west, receives the most precipitation, 30 for 0.70 inches 881 millimeters. On the eastern leeward side of a mountain range, the valleys are much drier. Lone Pine averages 11.45 inches 291 millimeters, and Deer Lodge 11.00 inches 279 millimeters of precipitation. The mountains can receive over 100 inches to 1,500 millimeters. For example, the Grinnell Glacier in Glacier National Park gets 105 inches to 1,700 millimeters. 173, an area southwest of Belfry averaged only 6.59 inches, 167 millimeters, over us. Most of the larger cities get 30 to 50 inches or 0.76 to 1.7 meters of snow each year. Mountain ranges can accumulate 300 inches or 7.6 meters of snow during a winter. Heavy snowstorms may occur from September through May, though most snow falls from November to March. 172. The climate has become warmer in Montana, with the average temperature rising almost to 0.5 degrees Fahrenheit, 1.3 C since 1900, at a rate higher than the continental U.S. average, and continues to do so. 177. The glaciers in Glacier National Park have receded and are predicted to melt away completely in a few decades. 178. Many Montana cities set heat records during July 2007, the hottest month ever recorded in Montana. 179. 180. Winters are warmer, too, and have fewer cold spells. Previously, these cold spells had killed off bark beetles, but these are now attacking the forests of western Montana. 181. 182. The warmer winters in the region have allowed various species to expand their ranges and proliferate. 183. The combination of warmer weather, attack by beetles, and mismanagement has led to a substantial increase in the severity of forest fires in Montana. 179. 182. According to a study done for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency by the Harvard School of Engineering and Applied Science, parts of Montana will experience a 200% increase in area burned by wildfires and an 80% increase in related air pollution. 180. For 185, the table below lists average temperatures for the warmest and coldest month for Montana's 7 largest cities. The coldest month varies between December and January depending on location, although figures are similar throughout. Cities and towns. See also list of cities and towns in Montana and list of counties in Montana, Missoula. the second largest city in Montana. Montana has 56 counties and a total of 360 for places as defined by the United States Census Bureau, the latter comprising 129 incorporated places and 235 census-designated places. The incorporated places are made up of 52 cities, 75 towns, and two consolidated city counties. 188 Montana has one city, Billings, with a population over 100,000, and 3 cities with populations over 50,000, Missoula, Great Falls, and Bozeman. The state also has 5 micropolitan statistical areas centered on Bozeman, Butte, Helena, Kalispell, and Havre. 189 collectively. All of these areas excluding Havre are known informally as the Big Seven. As they are consistently the 7 largest communities in the state, their rank order in terms of population is Billings, Missoula, Great Falls, Bozeman, Butte, Helena, and Kalispell. According to the 2010 U.S. Census, 190. Based on 2013 census numbers, they contain 35% of Montana's population. 191, and the counties in which they are located are home to 62% of the state's population. 190 to the geographic center of population of Montana is in sparsely populated Mark County, in the town of White Sulphur Springs. The United States Census Bureau states that the population of Montana was 1,132,812 on July 1, 2023, a 4.5% increase since the 2020 census. 194. The 2020 census put Montana's population at 1,084,225. During the first decade of the new century, growth was mainly concentrated in Montana's 7 largest counties, with the highest percentage growth in Gallatin County, which had a 30.9% increase in its population from 2010 to 2020. The city having the largest percentage growth was Kalispell, with 40.1%, and the city with the largest increase in actual residents was Billings, with an increase in population of 12,946 from 2010 to 2020. On January 3, 2012, the Census and Economic Information Center, CEIC, at the Montana Department of Commerce estimated Montana had hit the 1 million population mark sometime between November and December, or 2011. 195. According to HUD's 2022 Annual Homeless Assessment Report, there were an estimated 1,585 homeless people in Montana. 196, 197. In 2018, the top countries of origin for Montana's immigrants were Canada, Mexico, Germany, China, and Vietnam. 198 according to the 2020 census. 88.9% of the population was white, 87.8% non-Hispanic white, 6.7% American Indian and Alaska Native, 4.1% Hispanics and Latinos of any race, 0.9% Asian, 0.6% Black or African American, 0.1% Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islander, and a 0.8% from 2 or more races. 199. The largest European ancestry groups in Montana as of 2010 were German 27.0%, Irish 14.8%, English 12.6%, Norwegian 10.9%, French 4.7%, and Italian 3.4%. 200 Interstate Demographics. Mountain has a larger Native American population, both numerically and as a percentage, than most U.S. states. Ranked 45th in population by the 2010 census, it is 19th in Native people, 200 for, who are 6.5% of the state's population, the 6th highest percentage of all 50 states, 200 for, of Montana's 56 counties. Native Americans constitute a majority in 3, Bighorn, Glacier, and Roosevelt. 205 other counties with large Native American populations include Blaine, Cascade, Hill, Missoula, and Yellowstone counties. 206. The state's Native American population grew by 27.9% between 1980 and 1990 at a time when Montana's entire population rose 1.6%, 206, and by 18.5% between 2000 and 2010. 207 map of counties in Montana by racial plurality, per the 2020 U.S. Census Legendas of 2009. Almost two-thirds of Native Americans in the state live in urban areas. 206 of Montana's 20 largest cities, Polson 15.7%, Haver 13.0%, Great Falls 5.0%, Billings 4%, and Anaconda 3.1% had the greatest percentages of Native American residents in 2010. 208 Billings for 1,619, Great Falls to 1,942, Missoula 1,838, Haver 1,210, and Polson 706 have the most The state's 7 reservations include more than 12 distinct Native American ethno-linguistic groups. 209, while the largest European American population in Montana is German, which may also include Ows, Tryon, and Swiss, among other groups. Pockets of significant Scandinavian ancestry are prevalent in some of the farming-dominated northern and eastern prairie regions, parallel to nearby regions of North Dakota and Minnesota. Farmers of Irish, Scots, and English roots also settled in Montana. The historically mining-oriented communities of western Montana, such as Butte, have a wider range of European American ethnicity. Finns, Eastern Europeans, and especially Irish settlers left an indelible mark on the area, as well as people originally from British mining regions such as Cornwall, Devon, and Wales. The nearby city of Helena, also founded as a mining camp, had a similar mix in addition to a small Chinatown, 209 the Hutterites, an Anabaptist sect originally from Switzerland, settled in Montana, and today is second only to South Dakota in U.S. Hutterite population, with several colonies across the state. Beginning in the mid-1990s, the state also had an influx of Amish, who moved to Montana from increasingly urbanized areas of Ohio and Pennsylvania. 210 Montana's Hispanic population is concentrated in the Billings area in south-central Montana, where many of Montana's Mexican Americans have been in the state for generations. Great Falls has the highest percentage of African Americans in its population, although Billings has more African American residents than Great Falls. 208 the Chinese in Montana, while a low percentage today, have been a historically important presence. About 2,000 to 3,000 Chinese miners were in the mining areas of Montana by 1870 and 2,500 in 1890. However, public opinion grew increasingly negative towards them in the 1890s, and nearly half of the state's Asian population left by 1900, 211 today. The Missoula area has a large Hmong population, 212, and the nearly 3,000 Montanans who claim Filipino ancestry are the largest Asian American group in the state, 209. In the 2015 United States Census estimates, Montana had the second highest percentage of U.S. military veterans living there. Only the state of Alaska had a higher percentage, with roughly 14% of Alaska's population over 18 being veterans, with Montana having roughly 12% of its population over 18 being veterans, 213. Native Americans' general locations of Indian reservations in Montana. In 2020, 67,612 people in Montana self-identified as Native American, while 100,578 did in combination with one or more other races. 214, many treaties and federal legislation, including the Indian Appropriations Act 1851, the Dawes Act 1887, and the Indian Reorganization Act 1934, enabled the creation of 7 Indian reservations, encompassing 11 federally recognized tribal nations in Montana. A 12th nation, the Little Shell Tribe of Chippewa Indians of Great Falls, was recognized by the federal government in December 2019 215. The Blackfeet Nation is headquartered on the Blackfeet Indian Reservation 1851 in Browning. Crow on the Crow Indian Reservation 1868, 216 in Crow Agency. Confederated Salish and Kootenai and Pendorile on the Flathead Indian Reservation 1855 in Pablo, Northern Cheyenne on the Northern Cheyenne Indian Reservation 1880 for at Lame Deer. Assiniboine and Gros Ventre on the Fort Belknap Indian Reservation 1888 in Fort Belknap. Agency, Assiniboine and Sioux on the Fort Peck Indian Reservation 1888 at Poplar. And Chippewa on the Rocky Boys Indian Reservation 1960. Approximately 63% of all Native people live off the reservations, concentrated in the larger Montana cities, with the largest concentration of urban Indians in Great Falls. The state also has a small Metis population, and 1990 census data indicated that people from as many as 275 different tribes lived in Montana. 217, Montana's Constitution specifically reads, "The state recognizes the distinct and unique cultural heritage of the American Indians and is committed in its educational goals to the preservation of their cultural integrity." 218, it is the only state in the U.S. with such a constitutional mandate. The Indian Education for All Act was passed in 1999 to provide funding for this mandate and ensure implementation. 219, it mandates that all schools teach American Indian history, culture, and heritage from preschool through college. 220, for kindergarten through 12th grade students. An Indian education for all curriculum from the Montana Office of Public Instruction is available free to all schools. 221. The state was sued in 2000 because of lack of funding, and the state has increased its support of the program. 219. South Dakota passed similar legislation in 2007, and Wisconsin was working to strengthen its own program based on this model and the current practices of Montana's schools. 219. Each Indian reservation in the state has a fully accredited tribal college. The University of Montana was the first to establish dual admission agreements with all of the tribal colleges, and as such it was the first institution in the nation to actively facilitate student transfer from the tribal colleges. 220. What is now Montana was at various times inhabited by tribes such as the Crow, the Blackfeet, the Assiniboine, the Gros Ventre, the Kootenai, the Flathead Salish and Kalispel, the Kiowa, the Sioux, the Arapaho, the Arikara, the Bannock, the Cheyenne, the Ojibwe, the Hidatsa, the Cree, the Nez Perce, the Mandan, the Shoshone, and the Spokane. 222. 223. Many Montanans also reported belonging to various Native American tribes in 2010 census, the largest of which were the Blackfeet, 12,831 people, the Crow, 8,680 people, the Cheyenne, 912, the Assiniboine Sioux, 5,828, the Chippewa Cree, 5,495, the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes for 1,809, the Ojibwe for 1,284, the Sioux 2,698, the Assiniboine to 1,673, the Gros Ventre to 1,484, and the Salish tribal grouping 1,915. Other tribes included the Cree, the MHA Nation, the Kootenai, the Fort Belknap Indian Community, the Arapaho, and more. 224. Native Americans' general locations of Indian reservations in Montana. In 2020, 67,612 people in Montana self-identified as Native American, while 100,578 did in combination with one or more other races. 214. Many treaties and federal legislation, including the Indian Appropriations Act 1851, the Dawes Act 1887, and the Indian Reorganization Act 1934, enabled the creation of 7 Indian reservations, encompassing 11 federally recognized tribal nations in Montana, a 12th nation, The Little Shell tribe of Chippewa Indians of Great Falls was recognized by the federal government in December 2019, 215. The Blackfeet Nation is headquartered on the Blackfeet Indian Reservation 1851 in Browning. Crow on the Crow Indian Reservation 1868, 216 in Crow Agency. Confederated Salish and Kootenai and Pendorile on the Flathead Indian Reservation 1855 in Pablo, Northern Cheyenne on the Northern Cheyenne Indian Reservation 1884 at Lame Deer. Assiniboine and Grosvenor on the Fort Belknap Indian Reservation 1888 in Fort Belknap. Agency, Assiniboine and Sioux on the Fort Peck Indian Reservation 1888 at Poplar, and Chippewaukee on the Rocky Boys Indian Reservation 1916. Approximately 63% of all native people live off the reservations, concentrated in the larger Montana cities, with the largest concentration of urban Indians in Great Falls. The state also has a small Metis population, and 1990 census data indicated that people from as many as 275 different tribes lived in Montana. 217. Montana's Constitution specifically reads, "The state recognizes the distinct and unique cultural heritage of the American Indians and is committed in its educational goals to the preservation of their cultural integrity." 218. It is the only state in the U.S. with such a constitutional mandate. The Indian Education for All Act was passed in 1999 to provide funding for this mandate and ensure implementation. 219. It mandates that all schools teach American Indian history, culture, and heritage from preschool through college. 220 for kindergarten through 12th grade students. An Indian education for all curriculum from the Montana Office of Public Instruction is available free to all schools. 221. The state was sued in 2000 because of lack of funding, and the state has increased its support of the program. 219. South Dakota passed similar legislation in 2007. And Wisconsin was working to strengthen its own program based on this model and the current practices of Montana's schools. 219. Each Indian reservation in the state has a fully accredited tribal college. The University of Montana was the first to establish dual admission agreements with all of the tribal colleges, and as such it was the first institution in the nation to actively facilitate student transfer from the tribal colleges. 220. What is now Montana was at various times inhabited by tribes such as the Crow, the Blackfeet, the Assiniboine, the Grosvenor, the Kootenai, the Flathead Salish and Kalispel, the Kiowa, the Sioux, the Arapaho, the Arikara, the Bannock, the Cheyenne, the Ojibwe, the Hidatsa, the Cree, the Nez Perce, the Mandan, the Shoshone, and the Spokane. 222. 223. Many Montanans also reported belonging to various Native American tribes in 2010 census, the largest of which were the Blackfeet, 12,831 people, the Crow, 8,680 people, the Cheyenne, 5,912, the Assiniboine Sioux, 5,828, the Chippewa Cree, 5,495, the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes for 1,809, the Ojibwe for 1,284, the Sioux 2,698, the Assiniboine 2,673, the Grosvenor 2,484, and the Salish tribe. Other tribes included the Cree, the MHA Nation, the Kootenai, the Fort Belknap Indian Community, the Arapaho, and more. 224. Economy. See also Montana locations by per capita income and list of power stations in Montana. Montana ranks second nationally in craft breweries per capita. First Interstate Center in downtown Billings is the tallest building in Montana. As of 2022, the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis estimated Montana's gross domestic product was $67.07 billion, 47th in the nation, and per capita personal income was $60,980 for dollars, 28th in the nation. 247 total employment, 371,239 as of 2018. 248 total employer establishments, 38,720 as of 2018. 248. Montana is a relative hub of beer microbrewing, ranking third in the nation in number of craft breweries per capita in 2011. 249 significant industries exist for lumber and mineral extraction. The state's resources include gold, coal, silver, talc, and vermiculite. Eco-taxes on resource extraction are numerous. A 1970 state severance tax on coal, which varied from 20 to 30%, was upheld by the Supreme Court of the United States in Commonwealth Edison Co. v. Montana, 453 U.S. 609, 1981. 250. Tourism is also important to the economy, with more than 10 million visitors a year to Glacier National Park, Flathead Lake, the Missoula River headwaters, the site of the Battle of Little Bighorn, and 3 of the 5 entrances to Yellowstone National Park. 251. Montana's personal income tax contains 7 brackets, with rates ranging from 1.0 to 6. Montana has no sales tax, and household goods are exempt from property taxes. However, property taxes are assessed on livestock, farm machinery, heavy equipment, automobiles, trucks, and business equipment. The amount of property tax owed is not determined solely by the property's value. The property's value is multiplied by a tax rate set by the Montana legislature to determine its taxable value. The taxable value is then multiplied by the mill levy established by various taxing jurisdictions, city and county government, school districts, and others. 252. In the 1980s, the absence of a sales tax became economically deleterious to communities bound to the state's tourism industry, as the revenue from income and property taxes provided by residents was grossly insignificant in regards to paying for the impact of non-residential travel, especially road repair. In 1985, the Montana legislature passed a law allowing towns with fewer than 5,500 residents and unincorporated communities with fewer than 2,500 to levy a resort tax if more than half the community's income came from tourism. The resort tax is a sales tax that applies to hotels, motels, and other lodging and camping facilities, restaurants, fast food stores, and other food service establishments, taverns, bars, nightclubs, lounges, or other public establishments that serve alcohol, as well as destination ski resorts or other destination recreational facilities. 253. It also applies to luxuries, defined by law as any item normally sold to the public or to transient visitors or tourists that does not include food purchased unprepared or unserved, medicine, medical supplies and services, appliances, hardware supplies and tools, or any necessities of life. 250. For approximately 12.2 million non-residents visited Montana in 2018, and the population was estimated to be 1.06 million. This extremely disproportionate ratio of residents paying taxes versus non-residents using state-funded services and infrastructure makes Montana's resort tax crucial in order to safely maintain heavily used roads and highways, as well as protect and preserve state parks. As of November 2024, the state's unemployment rate is 3.2%. 255. The lowest rate was 2.5% in March 2023, and the highest was 12.0% in April 2020. 255. Schools. Montana Territory was formed on April 26, 1864, when the U.S. passed the Organic Act. 256. Schools started forming in the area before it was officially a territory, as families started settling into the area. The first schools were subscription schools that typically met in the teacher's home. The first formal school on record was at Fort Owen in Bitterroot Valley in 1862. The students were Indian children and the children of Fort Owen employees. The first school term started in early winter and lasted only until February 28th. Classes were taught by Mr. Robinson, 257. Another early subscription school was started by Thomas Dimsdale in Virginia City in 1863. In this school, students were charged $1.75 per week. 258. The Montana Territorial Legislative Assembly had its inaugural meeting in 1864. 259. The first legislature authorized counties to levy taxes for schools, which set the foundations for public schooling. 260. Madison County was the first to take advantage of the newly authorized taxes, and it formed the first public school in Virginia City in 1886. 258. The first school year was scheduled to begin in January 1866, but severe weather postponed its opening until March. The first school year ran through the summer and did not end until August 17th. One of the first teachers at the school was Sarah Raymond. She was a 25-year-old woman who had traveled to Virginia City via wagon train in 1865. To become a certified teacher, Raymond took a test in her home and paid a $6 fee in gold dust to obtain a teaching certificate. With the help of an assistant teacher, Mrs. Farley, 261, Raymond was responsible for teaching 50 to 60 students each day out of the 81 students enrolled at the school. Sarah Raymond was paid $125 per month, and Mrs. Farley was paid $75 per month. No textbooks were used in the school. In their place was an assortment of books brought by various immigrants. 262. Raymond quit teaching the following year, but she later became the Madison County Superintendent of Schools. 261. Culturacy also, music of Montana, artists from Montana, and authors from Montana. Many well-known artists, photographers, and authors have documented the land, culture, and people of Montana in the last 130 years. Painter and sculptor Charles Marion Russell, known as the cowboy artist, created more than 2,000 paintings of cowboys, Native Americans, and landscapes set in the western United States and in Alberta, Canada. 263. The C.M. Russell Museum Complex in Great Falls, Montana, houses more than 2,000 Russell artworks, personal objects, and artifacts. Pioneering feminist author, filmmaker, and media personality Mary McLean attained international fame in 1902 with her memoir of 3 months in her life in Butte, The Story of Mary McLean. She referred to Butte throughout the rest of her career and remains a controversial figure there for her mixture of criticism and love for Butte and its people. Evelyn Cameron, a naturalist and photographer from Terry, documented early 20th century life on the Montana prairie, taking startlingly clear pictures of everything around her. Cowboys, sheep herders, weddings, river crossings, freight wagons, people working, badlands, eagles, coyotes, and wolves. 260. For many notable Montana authors have documented or been inspired by life in Montana in both fiction and nonfiction works. Pulitzer Prize winner Wallace Earl Stegner from Great Falls was often called the Dean of Western Writers. 265. James Willard Schultz Apicuni from Browning is most noted for his prolific stories about Blackfeet life and his contributions to the naming of prominent features in Glacier National Park. 266. Major cultural events. Dancers at Crow Fair in 1941. Montana hosts numerous arts and cultural festivals and events every year. Major events include Bozeman was once known as the sweet pea capital of the nation, referencing the prolific edible pea crop. To promote the area and celebrate its prosperity, local business owners began a sweet pea carnival that included a parade and queen contest. The annual event lasted from 1906 to 1916. Promoters used the inedible but fragrant and colorful sweet pea flower as an emblem of the celebration. In 1977, the sweet pea concept was revived as an arts festival rather than a harvest celebration, growing into a 3-day event that is one of the largest festivals in Montana. 267 Montana Shakespeare in the Parks has been performing free live theatrical productions of Shakespeare and other classics throughout Montana and the Northwest region since 1973. The organization is an outreach endeavor that is part of the College of Arts and Architecture at Montana State University. Bozeman. 268. The Montana Shakespeare Company is based in Helena. 269 since 1909. The Crow Fair and Rodeo near Hardin has been an annual event every August in Crow Agency and is the largest northern Native American gathering, attracting nearly 45,000 spectators and participants. 270. Since 1952, North American Indian Days has been held every July in Browning. 271. Lame Deer hosts the annual Northern Cheyenne Powwow. Economy. See also Montana locations by per capita income and list of power stations in Montana. Montana ranks second nationally in craft breweries per capita. First Interstate Center in downtown Billings is the tallest building in Montana. As of 2022, the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis estimated Montana's gross domestic product was $67.07 billion, 47th in the nation, and per capita personal income was $60,980 for dollars, 28th in the nation. 247 total employment, 371,239 as of 2018, 248 total employer establishments, 38,720 as of 2018, 248. Montana is a relative hub of beer microbrewing, ranking third in the nation in number of craft breweries per capita in 2011. 249 significant industries exist for lumber and mineral extraction. The state's resources include gold, coal, silver, talc, and vermiculite. Eco-taxes on resource extraction are numerous. A 1970 for state severance tax on coal, which varied from 20 to 30%, was upheld by the Supreme Court of the United States in Commonwealth Edison Co. V. Montana, 453 U.S. 609 1981. 250. Tourism is also important to the economy, with more than 10 million visitors a year to Glacier National Park, Flathead Lake, the Missoula River headwaters, the site of the Battle of Little Bighorn, and 3 of the 5 entrances to Yellowstone National Park. 251. Montana's personal income tax contains 7 brackets, with rates ranging from 1.0 to 6. Montana has no sales tax, and household goods are exempt from property taxes. However, property taxes are assessed on livestock, farm machinery, heavy equipment, automobiles, trucks, and business equipment. The amount of property tax owed is not determined solely by the property's value. The property's value is multiplied by a tax rate set by the Montana legislature to determine its taxable value. The taxable value is then multiplied by the mill levy established by various taxing jurisdictions, city and county government, school districts, and others. 252. In the 1980s, the absence of a sales tax became economically deleterious to communities bound to the state's tourism industry, as the revenue from income and property taxes provided by residents was grossly insignificant in regards to paying for the impact of non-residential travel, especially road repair. In 1985, the Montana legislature passed a law allowing towns with fewer than 5,500 residents and unincorporated communities with fewer than 2,500 to levy a resort tax if more than half the community's income came from tourism. The resort tax is a sales tax that applies to hotels, motels, and other lodging and camping facilities, restaurants, fast food stores, and other food service establishments, taverns, bars, nightclubs, lounges, or other public establishments that serve alcohol, as well as destination ski resorts or other destination recreational facilities. 253. It also applies to luxuries, defined by law as any item normally sold to the public or to transient visitors or tourists, that does not include food purchased unprepared or unserved, medicine, medical supplies and services, appliances, hardware supplies and tools, or any necessities of life. 250 for approximately 12.2 million non-residents visited Montana in 2018, and the population was estimated to be 1.06 million. This extremely disproportionate ratio of residents paying taxes versus non-residents using state-funded services and infrastructure makes Montana's resort tax crucial in order to safely maintain heavily used roads and highways, as well as protect and preserve state parks. As of November 2024, the state's unemployment rate is 3.2%, 255. The lowest rate was 2.5% in March 2023, and the highest was 12.0% in April 2020, 255. Sports: Montana State Bobcats football at Bobcat Stadium, Montana State University. Bosom and professional sports. There are no major league sports franchises in Montana due to the state's relatively small and dispersed population, but a number of minor league teams play in the state. Baseball is the minor league sport with the longest heritage in the state, and Montana is home to 4 independent teams, all members of the Pioneer League: the Billings Mustangs, Great Falls Voyagers, Missoula Paddleheads, and the Glacier Range Riders. College sports: all of Montana's 4-year colleges and universities field intercollegiate sports teams. The 2 largest schools, the University of Montana and Montana State University, are members of the Big Sky Conference and have enjoyed a strong athletic rivalry since the early 20th century. 6 of Montana's smaller 4-year schools are members of the Frontier Conference. 272 Olympic competitors. Ski jumping champion and United States Skiing Hall of Fame inductee Casper Oimon was captain of the U.S. Olympic team at the 1936 Winter Olympics while he was a resident of Montana. He placed 13th that year and had previously finished 5th at the 1932 Winter Olympics. 278 Montana has produced 2 U.S. champions and Olympic competitors in men's figure skating, both from Great Falls. John Misha Petkovich lived and trained in Montana before entering college, competed in the 1968 and 1972 Winter Olympics. 280 Scott Davis, also from Great Falls, competed at the 1990 for Winter Olympics. 281 Missoulian Tommy Mo won Olympic gold and silver medals at the 1990 for Winter Olympics in downhill skiing and Super G, the first American skier to win 2 medals at any Winter Olympics. 280 to Eric Berghaus, also of Missoula, won an Olympic gold medal in freestyle aerial skiing at the 1998 Winter Olympics, also competing in 1994, 2002 and 2006 Olympics, plus winning 13 World Cup titles. 283 Maggie Voisin of Whitefish competed in the 2018 and 2022 Winter Olympics as a skier. She also qualified for the 2014 Winter Olympics, but was unable to play as she broke her ankle during training. 284 Outdoor Recreation Mountain provides year-round outdoor recreation opportunities for residents and visitors. Hiking, fishing, hunting, watercraft recreation, camping, golf, cycling, horseback riding, and skiing are popular activities. 289 Fishing and hunting. Montana has been a destination for its world-class trout fisheries since the 1930s. 290 Fly. Fishing for several species of native and introduced trout in rivers and lakes is popular for both residents and tourists throughout the state. Montana is the home of the Federation of Fly Fishers and hosts many of the organization's annual conclaves. The state has robust recreational lake trout and kokanee salmon fisheries in the west. Walleye can be found in many parts of the state, while northern pike, smallmouth and largemouth bass fisheries, as well as catfish and paddlefish, can be found in the waters of eastern Montana. 291 Robert Redford's 1990 film of Norman Maclean's novel, A River Runs Through It, was filmed in Montana and brought national attention to fly fishing and the state. 292 fishing makes up a sizable component of Montana's total tourism economic output. In 2017, non-residents generated $4.7 billion in economic output, of which $1.3 billion was generated by visitor groups participating in guided fishing experiences. 293 there are fall bow and general hunting seasons for elk, pronghorn antelope, white-tailed deer, and mule deer. A random draw grants a limited number of permits for moose, mountain goats, and bighorn sheep. There is a spring hunting season for black bear, and limited hunting of bison that leave Yellowstone National Park has been allowed. Current law allows both hunters and trappers specified numbers limits of wolves and mountain lions. Trapping of assorted fur-bearing animals is allowed in certain seasons, and many opportunities exist for migratory waterfowl and upland bird hunting. 295. The Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, which protects wildlife habitat and promotes hunting heritage, was founded in Montana. Health Montana has two trauma eye hospitals, both in Billings. The Billings Clinic Hospital became the first in Montana and neighboring Wyoming. 305. In 2024, Intermountain Health St. Vincent Regional Hospital also received verification. 306. 307. There are trauma to hospitals in Missoula and Great Falls. 308. There are 25 television stations in Montana, representing each major U.S. network. 314. As of August 2013, there are 527 FCC-licensed FM radio stations broadcast in Montana, with 114 such AM stations. 315. 316. During the age of the Copper Kings, each Montana Copper Company had its own newspaper. This changed in 1959 when Lee Enterprises bought several Montana newspapers. 317. 318. Montana's largest circulating daily city newspapers are the Billings Gazette, circulation 39. 405. Great Falls Tribune 26,733, and Missoulian 25,439. 319. In May 2023, Montana became the first U.S. state to ban the social media app TikTok and online marketplace, Temu. 320. 321. Transportation article, Transportation in Montana. Also, list of Montana railroads, list of Montana numbered highways, and list of airports in Montana Yellowstone Airport, West Yellowstone. Montana railroads have been an important method of transportation in Montana since the 1880s. Historically, the state was traversed by the main lines of three east-west transcontinental routes: the Milwaukee Road, the Great Northern, and the Northern Pacific. Today, the BNSF Railway is the state's largest railroad, its main transcontinental route incorporating the former Great Northern Main Line across the state. Montana Rail Inc., a privately held Class II railroad, operated former Northern Pacific trackage in western Montana before being bought out by BNSF. In addition, Amtrak's Empire Builder train runs through the north of the state, stopping in Libby, Whitefish, West Glacier, Essex, East Glacier Park, Browning, Cut Bank, Shelby, Haver, Malta, Glasgow, and Wolf Point. Intercity bus service in Montana is provided by Jefferson Lines and Express Aero. Bozeman Yellowstone International Airport is the busiest airport in the state of Montana, surpassing Billings Logan International Airport in the spring of 2013. 323. 324. Montana's other major airports include Missoula International Airport, Great Falls International Airport, Glacier Park International Airport, Helena Regional Airport, Burt Mooney Airport, and Yellowstone Airport. 8 smaller communities have airports designated for commercial service under the Essential Air Service Program. 325. Historically, U.S. Route 10 was the primary east-west highway route across Montana, connecting the major cities in the southern half of the state. Still, the state's most important east-west travel corridor, the route is today served by Interstate 90 and Interstate 94, which roughly follow the same route as the Northern Pacific. U.S. routes to and 12 and Montana Highway 200 also traverse the entire state from east to west. Montana's only north-south interstate highway is Interstate 15. Other major north-south highways include U.S. routes 87, 89, 93, and 191. Montana and South Dakota are the only states to share a land border that is not traversed by a paved road. Highway 212, the primary paved route between the two, passes through the northeast corner of Wyoming between Montana and South Dakota. 326, 327. Law and Government Mine article. Montana state government constitution is governed by a constitution. The first constitution was drafted by a constitutional convention in 1889 in preparation for statehood. 90% of its language came from an 1884 constitution, which was never acted upon by Congress for national political reasons. The 1889 Constitution mimicked the structure of the United States Constitution, as well as outlining almost the same civil and political rights for citizens. However, the 1889 Montana Constitution significantly restricted the power of state government. The legislature was much more powerful than the executive branch, and the jurisdiction of the district courts very specifically described. 328 Montana voters amended the 1889 Constitution 37 times between 1889 and 1972. 329. In 1914, Montana granted women the vote. In 1916, Montana became the first state to elect a woman, Progressive Republican Jeanette Rankin, to Congress. 331 in 1971. Montana voters approved the call for a state constitutional convention. A new constitution was drafted, which made the legislative and executive branches much more equal in power and which was much less prescriptive in outlining powers, duties, and jurisdictions. 332. The draft included an expanded, more progressive list of civil and political rights, extended these rights to children for the first time, transferred administration of property taxes to the counties from the state, implemented new water rights, eliminated sovereign immunity, and gave the legislature greater power to spend tax revenues. The Constitution was narrowly approved, 116,415 to 113,883, and declared ratified on June 20, 1972. Three issues that the Constitutional Convention was unable to resolve were submitted to voters simultaneously with the proposed Constitution. Voters approved the legalization of gambling, a bicameral legislature, and retention of the death penalty. 333. The 1972 Constitution has been amended 31 times as of 2015. 334. Major amendments include establishment of a reclamation trust funded by taxes on natural resource extraction to restore mine land 1974. Restoration of sovereign immunity, when such immunity has been approved by a 2/3 vote in each House 1974. Establishment of a 90-day biennial rather than annual legislative session 1974. Establishment of a coal tax trust fund, funded by a tax on coal extraction 1976. Conversion of the mandatory decennial review of county government into a voluntary one, to be approved or disallowed by residents in each county 1978. Conversion of the provision of public assistance from a mandatory civil right to a non-fundamental legislative prerogative 1988. 335. A new constitutional right to hunt and fish 2004. A now defunct prohibition on same-sex marriage 2004. A prohibition on new taxes on the sale or transfer of real property 2010. And a constitutional provision codifying abortion rights 2024. 330 for 336 in 1992. Voters approved a constitutional amendment implementing term limits for certain statewide elected executive branch offices: Governor, Lieutenant Governor, Secretary of State, State Auditor, Attorney General, Superintendent of Public Instruction, and for members of the Montana Legislature. Extensive new constitutional rights for victims of crime were approved in 2016. 337. The 1972 Constitution requires that voters determine every 20 years whether to hold a new constitutional convention. Voters turned down a new convention in 1990 80% no, 338, and again in 2010, 58.6% no. 339 executive. See also list of governors of Montana and United States congressional delegations from Montana. Montana has 3 branches of state government: legislative, executive, and judicial. The executive branch is headed by an elected governor. The governor is Greg John Forty, a Republican elected in 2020. There are also 9 other statewide elected offices in the executive branch: Lieutenant Governor, Attorney General, Secretary of State, State Auditor, who also serves as Commissioner of Securities and Insurance, and Superintendent of Public Instruction. There are 5 Public Service Commissioners who are elected on a regional basis. The Public Service Commission's jurisdiction is statewide. There are 18 departments and offices which make up the executive branch: administration, agriculture, auditor, securities and insurance, commerce, corrections, environmental quality, fish, wildlife and parks, justice, labor and industry, livestock, military affairs, natural resources and conservation, public health and human services, revenue, state, and transportation. Elementary and secondary education are overseen by the Office of Public Instruction, led by the elected Superintendent of Public Instruction, in cooperation with the governor-appointed Board of Public Education. Higher education is overseen by a governor-appointed Board of Regents, which in turn appoints a Commissioner of Higher Education. The Office of the Commissioner of Higher Education acts in an executive capacity on behalf of the Regents and oversees the state-run Montana University system. Independent state agencies not within a department or office include the Montana Arts Council, Montana Board of Crime Control, Montana Historical Society, Montana Public Employees Retirement Administration, Commissioner of Political Practices, the Montana Lottery, Office of the State Public Defender, Public Service Commission, the Montana School for the Deaf and Blind, the Montana State Fund, which operates the state's unemployment insurance, worker compensation, and self-insurance operations, the Montana State Library, and the Montana Teachers Retirement System. Montana is an alcoholic beverage control state. 340. It is an equitable distribution and no-fault divorce state. It is one of 5 states to have no sales tax. 341. Legislative Montana Legislature is bicameral and consists of the 50-member Montana Senate and the 100-member Montana House of Representatives. The legislature meets in the Montana State Capitol in Helena in odd-numbered years for 90 days, beginning the first weekday of the year. The deadline for a legislator to introduce a general bill is the 40th legislative day. The deadline for a legislator to introduce an appropriations, revenue, or referendum bill is the 62nd legislative day. Senators serve 4-year terms, while representatives serve 2-year terms. All members are limited to serving no more than 8 years in a single 16-year period. Judicial Montana Supreme Court is the court of last resort in the Montana court system. The Constitution of 1889 provided for the election of no fewer than 3 Supreme Court justices and 1 Chief Justice. Each court member served a 6-year term. The legislature increased the number of justices to 5 in 1919. The 1972 Constitution lengthened the term of office to 8 years and established the minimum number of justices at 5. It allowed the legislature to increase the number of justices by 2, which the legislature did in 1979. The Montana Supreme Court has the authority to declare acts of the legislature and executive unconstitutional under either the Montana or U.S. constitutions. Its decisions may be appealed directly to the U.S. Supreme Court. The clerk of the Montana Supreme Court is also an elected position and serves a 6-year term. Neither justices nor the clerk is term limited. Montana district courts are the courts of general jurisdiction in Montana. There are no intermediate appellate courts. District courts have jurisdiction primarily over most civil cases, cases involving a monetary claim against the state, felony criminal cases, probate, and cases at law and in equity. When so authorized by the legislature, actions of executive branch agencies may be appealed directly to a district court. The district courts also have de novo appellate jurisdiction from inferior courts, city courts, justice courts, and municipal courts, and oversee naturalization proceedings. District court judges are elected and serve 6-year terms. They are not term limited. There are 22 judicial districts in Montana, served by 56 district courts and 46 district court judges. The district courts suffer from excessive workload, and the legislature has struggled to find a solution to the problem. Montana youth courts were established by the Montana Youth Court Act of 1974. They are overseen by district court judges. They consist of a chief probation officer, one or more juvenile probation officers, and support staff. Youth courts have jurisdiction over misdemeanor and felony acts committed by those charged as a juvenile under the law. There is a youth court in every judicial district, and decisions of the youth court are appealable directly to the Montana Supreme Court. The Montana Workers' Compensation Court was established by the Montana Workers' Compensation Act in 1975. There is a single workers' compensation court. It has a single judge, appointed by the governor. The Workers' Compensation Court has statewide jurisdiction and holds trials in Billings, Great Falls, Helena, Kalispell, and Missoula. The court hears cases arising under the Montana Workers' Compensation Act and is the court of original jurisdiction for reviews of orders and regulations issued by the Montana Department of Labor and Industry. Decisions of the court are appealable directly to the Montana Supreme Court. The Montana Water Court was established by the Montana Water Court Act of 1979. The Water Court consists of a chief water judge and for district water judges Lower Missouri River Basin, Upper Missouri River Basin, Yellowstone River Basin, and Clark Fork River Basin. The court employs 12 permanent special masters. The Montana Judicial Nomination Commission develops short lists of nominees for all 5 water judges, who are then appointed by the Chief Justice of the Montana Supreme Court subject to confirmation by the Montana Senate. The Water Court adjudicates water rights claims under the Montana Water Use Act of 1973 and has statewide jurisdiction. District courts have the authority to enforce decisions of the Water Court, but only the Montana Supreme Court has the authority to review decisions of the Water Court. From 1889 to 1909, elections for judicial office in Montana were partisan. Beginning in 1909, these elections became nonpartisan. The Montana Supreme Court struck down the nonpartisan law in 1911 on technical grounds, but a new law was enacted in 1935 which barred political parties from endorsing, making contributions to, or making expenditures on behalf of or against judicial candidates. In 2012, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down Montana's Judicial Nonpartisan Election Law and American Tradition Partnership, Inc. v. Spolek, 567 U.S. Sup. CT 2012. Although candidates must remain nonpartisan, spending by partisan entities is now permitted. Spending on state Supreme Court races exponentially increased to $1.6 million in 2014 and to more than $1.6 million in 2016, both new records. Federal offices and courts. The U.S. Constitution provides each state with 2 senators. Montana's 2 U.S. senators are Steve Daines, first elected in 2014 and later re-elected in 2020, and Tim Sheehy, elected in 2024. Both are Republicans. The U.S. Constitution provides each state with a single representative, with additional representatives apportioned based on population. From statehood in 1889 until 1913, Montana was represented in the United States House of Representatives by a single representative, elected at large. Montana received a second representative in 1913, following the 1910 census and reapportionment. Both members, however, were still elected at large. Beginning in 1919, Montana moved to district, rather than at large, elections for its to house members. This created Montana's first congressional district in the west and Montana's second congressional district in the east. In the reapportionment following the 1990 census, Montana lost one of its House seats. The remaining seat was again elected at large. In the reapportionment following the 2020 census, Montana regained a House seat, increasing the state's number of representatives in the House to 2 after a 30-year break. Starting from 2023, 340 to Republicans Troy Downing and Ryan Zink are the current office holders. Montana's Senate district is the 4th largest by area, behind Alaska, Texas, and California. The most notorious of Montana's early senators was William A. Clark, a copper king and one of the 50 richest Americans ever. He is well known for having bribed his way into the U.S. Senate. Among Montana's most historically prominent senators are Thomas J. Walsh, serving from 1913 to 1933, who was President-elect Franklin D. Roosevelt's choice for Attorney General when he died. Burton K. Wheeler, serving from 1923 to 1947, an oft-mentioned presidential candidate and strong supporter of isolationism. Mike Mansfield, the longest-serving Senate Majority Leader in U.S. history. Max Baucus served 1978 to 2014, longest-serving U.S. Senator in Montana history, and the senator who shepherded the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act through the Senate in 2010, and Lee Metcalf served 1961 to 1978, a pioneer of the environmental movement. Montana's House District is the largest congressional district in the United States by population, with just over 1,023,000 constituents. It is the second largest House district by area, after Alaska's at-large congressional district. Of Montana's House delegates, Jeanette Rankin was the first woman to hold national office in the United States when she was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives in 1916. 343. Also notable is Representative, later Senator, Thomas H. Carter, the first Catholic to serve as chairman of the Republican National Committee from 1892 to 1896. 340 for federal courts in Montana include the United States District Court for the District of Montana and the United States Bankruptcy Court for the District of Montana. 3 former Montana politicians have been named judges on the U.S. District Court. Charles Nelson Prey, who served in the U.S. House of Representatives from 1907 to 1913. James F. Batten, who served in the U.S. House of Representatives from 1961 to 1969. And Paul G. Hatfield, who served as an appointed U.S. Senator in Brian Morris, who served as an Associate Justice of the Montana Supreme Court from 2005 to 2013, currently serves as a judge on the court.
T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 3, 2, 1, 0, and liftoff of Space Shuttle Atlantis on a mission to build, resupply, and to do research on the International Space Station.
Houston now controlling. Atlantis begins its penultimate journey to shore up the International Space Station. Atlantis now in the proper alignment for its 8.5-minute ride to orbit. 4.5 million pounds of hardware and humans taking aim on the International Outpost. 30 seconds into the flight. Atlantis almost 2 miles in altitude, almost 6 miles downrange from the Kennedy Space Center already, traveling 500 miles an hour. The three liquid fuel main engines now throttling back to 72% of rated performance, going into the bucket, reducing the stress on the shuttle as it breaks through the sound barrier.